All right, Chair Smith, I've unmuted board members' microphones and all board members are on the Zoom meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. If everybody's ready, I'd like to go ahead then and call this meeting to order. This meeting is being conducted pursuant to the continuity of government ordinance adopted by the Board of Supervisors on May 4th, 2020. We're hosting it on the Zoom teleconference platform. And we do things a little differently, just so everybody knows, because you aren't seeing us, you're just hearing us. We do take pains to make clear as possible who is speaking at any time. And I would just ask everyone to indulge me in a roll call vote so that we can identify everyone on the call today. Mr. Frazier, Jackson District.
Here.
Mr. Whitson, Hampton District.
I'm here, thank you.
Ms. Donahue, Wakefield District.
I'm here.
Mr. Parrish, Stonewall Hawthorne District.
Here.
And I'm Christine Smith, Piedmont District. If everyone could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And a moment of silence, please. Thank you. The first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda, and I did want to make sure before we get too far down the road, Mr. Curry, is there anything else we need to discuss in terms of the structure of the meeting this evening before we take up the agenda?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. I noticed Mr. Zoviak is with us. Did he wish to speak at the beginning of the agenda?
I don't know. You only really have the one item after public comment, and so I'm not sure which order would be better.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Curry. Does anyone have a motion in regards to the adoption of the agenda?
Madam Chair, this is Keir Whitson representing the Hampton District. I just had one question about the agenda as presented. Under item D, subparts 1 and 2, I just wonder if for our future archive and record, if those items should still be retained in tonight's agenda, because it occurs to me that we completed our budget work on Monday night. That might be a question for Mr. Curry.
You certainly could remove
I
it
would
from the
defer to
agenda.
Mr. Curry, noting that I think D2 is more an informational item than anything. But
Right.
go ahead, Mr. Curry, I'm sorry.
Yes, they could both be removed if the board would like, or be retained and just passed over as you get to them without any action being taken.
Okay, as someone who's new to this, I just want to make sure administratively all of our ducks are in a row, so to speak. So if it's easier just to leave them in, I'll stand down.
All righty. Do we have a motion in regards to the agenda?
I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented since I've raised a stink.
Thank you,
This is
Mr.
Keir.
Wilson. Do I have a second, please?
Second, Ron Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. So we have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as presented. Mr. Frazier,
Aye.
Mr. Whitson.
Aye.
Ms. Donahue
Aye.
and Mr. Parrish.
Aye.
And I also. Thank you. That takes us to the next item on the agenda, the budget work session, which as noted, oh, I'm sorry, that takes us to the public comment, item C1. There's a number of ways that we can receive public comment in the course of this meeting. Mr. Curry, did we receive any public comment via email or the telephone?
No public comment was received by either email or phone as through the methods listed on the screen or through other methods that I'm aware of.
Thank you very much. That leads us to participation on the Zoom platform. For folks that have not done this before, up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen are 3 dots with the word "more" underneath of them. And if you put your cursor up there, you will have an option to raise your hand. And should you raise your hand, you can be identified by Mr. Curry and your mic turned on and participate in the meeting as it unfolds. So if you'd like to participate in the meeting, please do use that option under "more" to raise your hand, and we will patch you into the meeting. The normal rules for public comment do apply. If you could please identify yourself and the district that you're from and keep your comments under 5 minutes, we should be all set. Thank you. If you'd like to participate in the meeting, please do just raise your hand. I don't see anyone, Mr. Curry. Do you see anything?
No, I see no hands raised.
Okay. So if no one wishes to have any comments in the public comment period, we'll move on to item D1, which I believe, as noted, we worked through the other evening. And the only development that I would add is that the documents are ready and I'm stopping by the county offices to sign them tomorrow. Are there any additional facts about that, Mr. Curry, or things people need to know?
No, I believe you're in good shape.
Thank you. And do any of the board members have any questions?
Nope.
No.
Very good. And then the board budget meeting schedule reminder is attached to the agenda should anybody have any questions.
And I'll just note that I was asked today by the treasurer when she could get the signed resolution so they could move on their way with the tax rate information and get the bills ready and all that. So as soon as they're signed, we'll get them over to them and they'll start the process.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Mr. Curry. That takes us to agenda item E1, the COVID-19 update and discussion. I would suggest that we let Mr. Soviak lead this, Superintendent Soviak lead this part of the discussion this evening, since he's been gracious enough to join him, and then we can move on to other questions or concerns under this agenda item, if that suits the other members of the board.
Yep.
Fine.
I think that's the best way to proceed then, if you would patch him through, please, Mr. Curry.
Yes, I've unmuted Acting Superintendent Soviak's microphone. He should be able to speak with the board and the public.
Okay, great. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Crystal clear. Thank you.
perfect. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for having me. It's truly my pleasure to be representing Shenandoah National Park tonight as the acting superintendent. My normal title is Deputy Superintendent. As you all know, Jen left us at the beginning of April, and we are, the job was announced. It has been closed. My current boss has the cert in hand for all the applicants, and she will be starting the review process here shortly. So my hope is that we have a new superintendent in place by September. I've been asked to speak a little bit or speak about our status of the park concerning COVID-19. As you are all aware, starting the beginning of March, the park underwent several incremental closures until we finally got to a place where we had a full closure of the park as it was supported by the Rappahannock Health District. Since then, the park has been managed by an incident management team as with the incident commander of David Robinson and the deputy incident commander as Chief Ranger Cynthia Cirkfear. Almost all of our employees since then have been placed on either telework or, if they're not eligible for telework, work safety leave with some essential functions still ongoing in the park. Those essential functions included project management. We still had contracts that were ongoing in the park, law enforcement, emergency services, wildland fire suppression, communications, project compliance, and mowing as it related to emergency services along Skyline Drive, as well as trail to assist with clearing trail corridors for search and rescue. Over the last 3 weeks, as we await guidance from the Washington office, we have been developing an adaptive recovery plan to increase access to the park. This access will be done in a phased opening process with the objectives being to ensure for the safety and health of our visitors and employees. Second, ensure for the protection of park resources. And third, provide for visitor services only if objectives 1 and 2 are met. As you all know, the Secretary of the Interior had visited us last week on Monday, and I also, at that time, I also met with Congressman Klein and Congressman Riggleman. Their main question for me is, what is my main concern? I let them know that the park's main concern is aligning our reopening efforts with state guidance, along with guidance from neighboring counties and local health departments. The park also needs to be aware of the concerns that our local communities will have about our reopening. This process is fluid. We're still receiving and awaiting guidance from not only the CDC, but U.S. Public Health and the Washington offices. But we are close to developing a phase or to approval on our phase 1. There are some hoops we need to jump through, such as getting the adaptive recovery plan and a risk assessment approved by the Secretary's office, which we will be working on tomorrow, and hopefully we can push that up to the regional office by late tomorrow afternoon or early Friday. I do want to ensure that everybody's aware that our operations aren't going to look anything like they have in the past. It is not going to be a normal year for Shenandoah National Park. We haven't collected fees for a while, so we had to adjust for that. So we'll have limited staffing. That adjustment with staffing also is to ensure for our employee safety. So there's going to be a lot of things that have been normally open at certain times that just won't be open or people will not have access to. So I do want to go into a little bit of what phase looks like. And so to start off with, and I don't know when this is going to happen, we have hopes that it will happen soon, but again, we need to get approval from the Secretary's office. But the plan is to open Skyline Drive for day use only. So from 0500 to 2200, during phase 1, Skyline Drive will be open. That will provide access for visitors along all 105 miles of Skyline Drive. Most trailheads and trails within the park and trailheads along Skyline Drive will be open for visitor use. That'll be about 480 miles of trails. We will continue to follow state guidance and with a thought that a gathering of 10 or more people is not, or more than 10 people is not allowed, that Old Reg and the Cedar Run White Oak Circuit will not be open for public use. Those areas we saw when we were starting to close were just overwhelmed with visitors. We had cars parked all the way up on the highway. We couldn't get access to emergency services along the trail because there were so many people visiting those areas. We just feel opening those up in phase 1 will provide opportunities for more than 10 people to be gathering. Bathrooms along Skyline Drive will be open and will provide sanitation services as well as trash removal. Visitor centers, campgrounds, and picnic areas will remain closed for the time being. All boundary trailheads will remain closed. And so we will have people in the fee booths, whether the secretary will lift the suspension on collecting fees, we don't know. So we might be collecting fees at that time, we might not. During this phase, we will continue to monitor visitor behavior and impacts to our park resources and employees as we start to develop phase 2. One of the things I've been telling all county administrators, though, is I do want to assure you that we will not open up boundary trailheads unless we receive concurrence from the associated counties. That is a promise I'm going to make, I guess, unless the secretary steps in and says you have to open up boundary access. But he did say that we will follow state and local guidance, and that's something I want to adhere to. You guys were so helpful and supportive of those closures. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page before we open them up. Are there any questions for me at this time?
Thank you, Acting Superintendent Sobiak. If it's okay with you, we'll go around the table, so to speak, of supervisors and just hear concerns that any of us might have, just as a way to navigate this meeting.
Okay.
Mr. Frazier?
No, that answers quite a few questions I would have had.
Okay.
Great.
Mr. Whitson?
I really appreciate you participating in our meeting. Ms. Smith and I have in our districts 3 trailheads, 2 of which were overrun with visitors during the mid to late March time period. And I want to take a moment to commend Jennifer Flynn and Sally Hurlbert for helping us to get those trailheads shut down. Those included Little Devil Stairs, North Fork of the Thornton, and also Mount Marshall. And then they were kind enough to seek approval from your regional office to help us close the remaining 9 trailheads in Rappahannock County. And I think I speak on behalf of the board in telling you how grateful we are for your team's willingness to work with us to get that done, because we saw, I'm so pleased to hear you lead with this discussion of Old Rag and White Oak Canyon. We saw a logical and predictable overflow of mass crowds into popular trailheads in Rappahannock County as soon as those Madison County trailheads were closed. Mm-hmm. And we can anticipate that the same thing will happen again. And so I also appreciate that you have made a commitment and promise, which means a lot to me, to consult with us every step of the way to not open those trailheads in the lower boundary in Rappahannock County until we have all agreed that it's a good idea. And we're most concerned about three or 4 roads in particular that have trailheads at the terminus of those roads, and the adverse effect on the residents along those roads of crowds gathering. So thank you again. You've said all the right things, and we appreciate your sincerity in this regard. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. I do want to just make sure that everybody's aware that once we do open the drive, our law enforcement focus will have to shift a little bit. We won't be patrolling the boundaries as much as we have. And so that might be a concern, but I just, transparency goes, I just want to make sure everybody.
Superintendent Sobiak, if I could just ask a follow-up question that just occurred to me. There are two trailheads that, from my understanding, talking with Ms. Hurlbert, do not fall within kind of Rappahannock County jurisdiction. Those would include Pass Mountain and then Buck Hollow. And Buck Hollow in particular, as Ms. Smith can tell you, she lives not too far away from that trailhead. We're absolutely overrun. And I wonder, and you don't have to answer it now, but I wonder if you could double check, or if you're prepared to tell us now, how those two trailheads will be treated. Because they're really, I mean, they're national park trailheads to the extent that they're along US 211. And so they're not on or at the end of state highways in Rappahannock County. And I just wonder if those would be open as part of your Skyline Drive opening.
I'm sorry, Pass Mountain and Buck, they are within, they are within Rappahannock County.
They are within Rappahannock County, but the difference between those two and the remaining 10 trailheads in Rappahannock County are that they're adjacent to US 211. And so from an enforcement standpoint, I believe it would be almost impossible for our sheriff's department to complement your own law enforcement efforts. You said that you'll be pulled up on the Skyline Drive. I can tell you that Buck Hollow in particular became a huge problem because it is right on 211. And we all witnessed multiple weekend days, even before the weather got warmer, where cars were filling the shoulder along 211 adjacent to Buck Hollow. So I just wonder if you could look into those two and let us know if we would be able to keep those closed if needed, even when Skyline Drive is open.
Well, we're still seeing impacts of visitors parking along those areas. Yeah, so as long as they're a boundary trailhead within Rappahannock County, I don't feel like I should open those without concurrence from Rappahannock County. But
Okay.
I will speak to the Virginia State Police and see if they have any concerns with that, which I don't feel like they will, but I will check on that and I will get back with you. But I feel pretty confident that we won't open those up until you guys are in agreement.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Whitson. Ms. Donahue?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair Smith. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate that the Park Service is focused on working with state and local guidance. And I think that's huge for everyone that lives in Rappahannock County. I had been a member of the Adopt an Outcrop program and very disappointed to see it go away, but totally understand why, with the lack of funding that it needed to at this time due to the virus, which would lead me to hopefully suggest that when you open, and no time soon, do you actually do free entrance to the parks? Because I think everybody on this call, when that weekend occurred where it was free access, it was just out of control. And you guys need the money, we need the control. So if we could work together on that, that would be wonderful.
Well, I will be submitting a request to collect fees at first, the day we open up, and we'll see what happens.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue. Mr. Parrish?
No, I don't have any further comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. I just wanted to echo Mr. Whitson's comments, and thank you so much, Mr. Sobiak, for all the cooperation we've received from you and Superintendent Flynn and Sally Herbert on the work we've done in cooperation with you, closing the trailheads. And also we received a lot of cooperation from VDOT in terms of, some markings that they put up in parking areas that were in their right of way to help sort of close off some of the parking areas as well. It's really been a great group effort. I guess my question is, once you have the plan formulated and proposed, what sort of lead time do you anticipate giving us from when it's approved to when you actually open?
Well, we're working on efforts to put everything in place now. Obviously, we'll need to put out a press release. So I can't make any promises on that. Again, I have to send up my plan along with a risk assessment to the secretary's office. So I don't know if we're gonna open up next week or the week after. I really hope we are not forced to open up on Friday of next week, because then my concern is that we're going to be overwhelmed the first day we open up, and I really don't need that to be on a Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, that's sort of something I've had in the back of my mind too. Memorial Day weekend may be very challenging, depending on how the weather patterns are, because it is such a beautiful spot to get away and a nice long weekend to do that. So I think I just can't thank you enough for the lines of communication open. And I feel like as long as we continue to do this moving forward, we'll be successful. And just thank you again.
As soon as I get approval to open up, I will be reaching out to you to let you know of a date. We will be sending out a press release before we swing open the gates.
Thank you so much. And that also lets us inform our local businesses so that they can prepare for the occasion as well. So as soon as you can let us know, we do really very much appreciate that.
I will do that.
Thank you, Mr. Soviak. And did any of the other board members have anything additional? Very good. Thanks so much again, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you. I appreciate all the support you've given us.
Have a good evening.
You too.
All right. Mr. Curry, did you have any additional developments, or did you want to tee up the rest of this agenda item for us, please? Mr. Curry?
Sorry, I caught myself with mute on. I can iterate the actions of the governor with earlier this week releasing Executive Order 61, which was the process or entry into phase 1 of the recovery plan that, as far as everybody knows right now, will in fact start on the 15th. And then he released Executive Order 62. 62 was the document that holds Northern Virginia localities in phase 0. So while the state will move to phase 1, Nova will stay in phase 0. Within Executive Order 62, it does state that those residents within the impacted or affected counties, cities, are still under a stay-at-home order. How well those residents, I guess, obey that order has a great impact on what we see in the coming weekend and weekends. There was discussion that Northern Virginia may be 2 weeks or so behind the rest of the state, although all timelines are subject to change based on the data that comes out. With all that as a basis, I've been asked by board members, as identified in the narrative on board docs up on the screen, to prepare documents that could be used to modify the board's current stance with respect to COVID-19. As you mentioned earlier, Chair Smith, the board adopted an ordinance to effectuate the continuity of government on May 4th. Included in that ordinance was a section that disallowed the short-term rentals for less than 30 days. There's a document provided and attached, identified as proposed emergency ordinance to modify COVID-19 continuity of government ordinance. And that modified version does a few things. It ends the prohibition on short-term rentals upon the start of the governor's phase 1, which we all believe will be Friday. It adds language to the meeting section that broadens the reasons that electronic meetings can be used to include those that were incorporated into House Bill 29 that are just a little bit broader than what was provided for through the Continuity of Government Ordinance section or Code of Virginia section. And there's one other minor change that's not coming to me right now. Let's see. And also provides an opportunity for the board to make appointments while this ordinance is still in effect. And the thought there was that the board may be in a position as we move through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, sooner or later, we will be able to meet in person. And at that time, this continuity of government ordinance can persist. And if you're able to meet in person, then it makes sense that you should be able to make appointments at that time. And as Section 3 was written, it would held off those appointments till the ordinance is no longer in place. So again, there's 3 changes shown with highlighted, underlined italics. And one change at the end, changing the date through which those short-term rentals would not be allowed to start date for phase 1. In addition, there are 2 documents that dial up the loosening of the current position further, and they would be to completely rescind the continuity of government ordinance and basically go back to situation normal, and also rescind the declaration of local emergency. And these would be an either or scenario. You modify or you rescind, you don't do both. Happy to take any questions, and I'm sure the board members that requested these documents be prepared can speak to rationale on why the board may want to go one way or the other.
If I could just ask a follow-up question, Mr. Curry, on the modified document, it says that, or you're saying that we could hold meetings for different reasons. I know a concern of mine, there's a lot of Piedmont business out there in the wind while we're sticking to essential business only. Would we need a physical quorum for meetings, and could they do things like take on the Miller special exception application or text amendment requests?
Yes, I've discussed this with the county attorney, and the broadened language is not that much more broad, and that is that you can transact business that is statutorily required or necessary to continue operations. So the necessary to continue operations is really in parallel to the continuity of government section that we are using anyways, is 15.2.14.13. So the transact business is statutorily required probably does not extend to land use matters from Mr. Goff and my opinion. That means if those items are to be conducted, they cannot be conducted during an electronic only meeting. FOIA is very clear. Electronic meetings are not allowed. The only time they are allowed is if you're talking about the emergency, and then the Attorney General identified that outside of that, the section 15.2.14.13 states that notwithstanding any contrary provision of law, that a local government can put in place an ordinance that provides for this, the ability to continue operating in times of emergency and disaster such as this. So that leaves only one solution, that is meeting in person. And there will be a time when that is appropriate. I've made a recommendation to the board that I believe that would be most appropriate as the state and the governor moves into phase 2. And in general, that is when he has suggested that groups of 50 or more, 50 or less people could convene and with phase one being 10 or fewer people gathering. I say that while also saying that the executive orders do not restrict the function of government, and the operation of government is specifically excluded from the executive orders. So you would not be breaking an executive order by meeting in person, but local government should probably be leading by example, and also recognizing that those groupings or gathering limits are there for a reason, and reasons put in place through consultation with the health department and the state leaders.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. I think I've talked too much. I would like to go around the table and see what the other supervisors think. Mr. Frazier?
I think I've mentioned several times, I think that we should be able to get back to work with our committees and the planning commission. But I still have a number of people that have told me that they're concerned about the large number of people that may come into the county once we start lifting some of the restrictions. So I don't know about lifting the short-term rental. I don't even know how we're enforcing that to start with. We just have a emergency ordinance that says you can't rent them.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Mr. Whitson?
Thank you, Chair Smith. I reviewed all of these resolutions and revised ordinances pretty carefully. And on this first document, which is a modified continuity of government ordinance, my analysis really was based on the following: focused on number one, the change in the restriction on short-term rentals, and then two, on expanding what's allowed under the essential business provision of the ordinance. First, I believe strongly that we should follow state guidelines. The Commonwealth, as I mentioned at our meeting on Monday, they hold the data, the science, and the public health expertise. And so I think it is prudent and responsible on our part to follow the lead of those who have put all of the analytical pieces together to tell us what is best from a public health and safety standpoint. Along those same lines, I asked the question, are we being more restrictive than state guidelines? And then finally, what are we seeing locally in terms of the COVID-19 emergency? And in fact, latest data shows we are still seeing in Rappahannock County and in the Rappahannock Health District what appears to be a troubling increase in cases, including over a 7-day average period. All of that said, I'm okay with the language in this amended ordinance, although I'm not thrilled about it, to relax the restrictions on short-term rentals, only because I believe that we should be in step with state guidelines. And as that provision is currently written prior to modification, it puts us in a position where we are actually more restrictive than what the state's recommending. So I'm comfortable with that language. And then on the second, Chair Smith, I appreciate that you brought up the Miller application, because the Millers, as your constituents, also received support from me when we both asked the question if their special exception permit application public hearing, which had already been teed up and advertised, did not constitute essential business, given that it involved the construction of tourist homes that would then allow their business to potentially have a head start when the economy opens again. And at that time, we were instructed by the county administrator and appropriately the county attorney that was beyond the definition of essential business. So on the second provision, I believe the change that has been added would be to allow for discussion of statutorily mandated business or required business. I believe that might mean, as one example, renewed discussion of the comprehensive plan. and that's fine with me. But I do think that Mr. Curry's analysis ought to be very, very careful in returning to physical meetings. I have not heard from a single constituent in the Hampton voting district representing 1,500 people who said that we should change what we're doing now vis-a-vis electronic meetings. So if electronic meetings continue and this revised language allows for the Planning Commission to resume work on something that is allowed or is required under the statute, that's fine. But we should not be calling meetings because with a 10-person limit, we'd be putting the public in a position where they would have to make a choice between showing up for a meeting and their own health. And I think that's not correct. So for now, I'm okay with this ordinance as written. It does not contemplate resuming in-person meetings. And I think that's the important takeaway for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitson. Ms. Donahue?
Yes, thanks, Chairman Smith. I brought up the modification to the short-term rentals as a business owner, as well as someone who is looking at the governor's phase 1, which is allowing for businesses such as restaurants to open, but with outdoor seating only and limited numbers. But it's still allowing my business and others to start having customers back. And to me, when we voted on this, it was during the early stages of the virus, and we were very concerned about people staying here and going to the parks. So at that time, it was an emergency, and I think we voted on it appropriately. But now the Commonwealth doesn't have any guidelines on lodging. It had the guidelines on the stay at home. And now that it's safer at home and people will be coming out, I think it's only fair to the businesses that have short-term rental to be allowed to have people stay in their facilities as long as they're following the guidelines that are set out for phase 1. I just don't feel like it's fair to single out an industry and say you can't do it, but we can. So I'm hopeful that we can vote on this evening in a positive way for those short-term rental owners. With the other comments or changes on this modification, I do believe that we don't know everything that's out there. There's a lot of people in Richmond with assistance from folks throughout the state that are setting the guidelines, and I don't see any. I know I don't have the medical expertise to say that what they're telling us is wrong. And I would feel like did our citizens a disservice by allowing meetings to occur that had 10 people in a room when I'm not even allowed to have 10 people in my restaurant. Well, I can have 10 people in my restaurant aside from just to pick up food or use the restroom, and then they got to get out. And there's science behind that theory. So I believe we need to wait and stay in line with what the governor is recommending in his phases. And hopefully phase 2 with 50 people plus, everybody can get back to normal meetings and make progress where we have been lagging behind, but lagging only because of a medical pandemic. I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue. Mr. Parrish?
Well, thank you, Chair Smith. So I'm in favor of the modified version as it's written. I just think that to rescind the declaration of emergency could possibly end up being a rash decision and have some ramifications that you don't want. And I know it's a slow process waiting around for this virus to go away, but I just think that for now I'm in favor of the resolution that modifies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Parrish. I apologize. I was having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. Thank you, though. I just wanted to thank Mr. Curry for drawing up all these documents. I think these are all good things to have in our pocket to use at the right time. I just wanted to ask another question. In discussing the modify option, Mr. Curry, you touched on something that I think has always been a question. The executive order prohibiting meetings more than 10 people, it doesn't really apply to government business. Is that correct?
That is correct. If you read the executive orders, there is a provision. I could probably bring it up.
It's fine. That was my understanding too, that the
Government, government
prohibition
operations.
really applied to social settings, and that, in terms of business and government function, the 10-person cap didn't really apply.
Well, it applies to all gatherings, but then it exempts out government operation.
Okay, and essential business, I would think.
The essential business comes into play through our use of the Code of Virginia Section 15.2.14.13, which is in place, allowing us to essentially overrule the FOIA laws, because notwithstanding any other law, even if another law says this, you can put into place ordinances that allow your county to keep functioning. And that's what we're doing. And so that's why it's such a tight framework on what we're allowed to do, because we're overruling some other very important laws. And so we need to only do those things that allow us to keep functioning, which does put pressure on us to get back to normal or as close to normal as soon as we can.
So if we are to adopt the modified document, is there anything in there that would preclude chairs of any body from calling meetings if they have a physical quorum? And I do understand that there are very real public safety concerns. And to that end, in partnership with a physical quorum, that members of the committee or authority that might not feel comfortable with the physical meeting could participate via an electronic platform, and members of the public could also participate via an electronic platform. Is that correct?
No, not exactly. So the code section that allows I'm getting an echo from somewhere. The code section allows the board to allow some of its members to participate in meetings electronically via adopting a local policy, which the board did earlier, and Supervisor Whitson joined you electronically. That does not allow citizens to join electronically, only a board member, and only 2 times per year, and only if there's a physical quorum present. So if another body had that policy adopted, then 1 or 2, depending on the number of total members on the body, because you'd have to have a physical quorum present, 1 or 2 could call in. But citizens must appear there. They do not have an option to call in. If you bar citizens from coming, then you are into the scenario where you must follow the altered rules, requiring overruling FOIA, i.e. the Continuity of Government Ordinance, which permits electronic participation, and then you're back to a restricted scope. Hopefully that's not too rambling. So you have no control over how many citizens come if you have a physical quorum seat.
Correct. Okay. Well, I think that answers all of my questions. Does anyone have a motion in regards to these proposals that are in front of us this evening?
Mr. Whitson had his hand up, sorry.
Yes, Mr. Whitson.
Thank you. Since, Madam Chair, since you raised the question of potential ambiguity in this this modified ordinance, would it not make sense to add some language stating that we, as a local government body and other government bodies, recognizing the public health crisis we continue to find ourselves in, that we will not meet other than electronically until no earlier than the start date of phase 2 of the governor's of the governor's phased in plan for getting back to normal. Would it be worthwhile to just remove all ambiguity and make that clear now so that there's no confusion for those who sit on various public bodies in the county?
Well, I would defer to Mr. Curry on that, but I think we can only use the powers that the state confers upon us, and I don't think we have that authority. Would you concur, Mr. Curry?
I think that you do through this ordinance. This ordinance is the only method through which any other body in the county could meet only electronically. And through this ordinance and the authority through the Code of Virginia, Section 4 does empower the board through the emergency manager to restrict gathering, congregating in and around buildings. And so I do think that you do have the authority to convey to subordinate bodies or other bodies who are using this ordinance when it's acceptable to meet physically. Whether that has to be in ordinance form or could be through a motion made outside of the ordinance, either route could work. The one thing I didn't say relative to these changes to the continuity of government ordinance is that this is an emergency ordinance, which means it's valid for 60 days. Those changes to the May 4th version will cease to exist in 60 days unless the board holds a public hearing to re-adopt them after hearing from the public. In 60 days, maybe all this is behind us and we want to rescind everything, and the public hearing will be to rescind the ordinance in its entirety, including any changes that were made through emergency. But it's important to understand that the changes would be valid for 60 days.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Did anyone have any other thoughts on the proposed resolutions or discussion of them?
Ron Fraser, I did. I think I raised my hand here.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser. I'm sorry.
No, I think this is how we kind of confuse the issue and wind up maybe even confusing ourselves. I know I seem to be feeling confused here that we're talking about perhaps opening the county up, opening up restaurants according to whatever the governor's plans are next Friday. And we're talking about keeping public meetings closed. And we have essential business that's not even being addressed. The Planning Commission, for instance, can't even hold a meeting to adopt an ordinance where we will conduct electronic meetings until such time as we can meet as a body. So no work is going to get done, period. And here, so the Board of Supervisors is saying, we're going to continue to work on essential business, but none of our committees will work on essential business because we're going to say that no public meetings can be done except electronically. But we can go meet at the restaurant and book a room for a week or two. So it seems like we're getting caught up in the minutia and we're not really looking at the big picture of how to get back to work and limiting that as we need to, but maybe we're being more restrictive just because we want to. I don't know.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser. Mr. Whitson, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say that I think that the modified language surrounding the line on essential business gives great leeway to the Planning Commission to be able to engage and work on anything that's statutorily required, including the comprehensive plan. And my point is really a public health one. I do not feel I am being a responsible representative to the residents of the Hampton district and to this county if we prematurely and without reason urgently decide that public meetings are okay when cases are on the rise and the governor's phased in plan is still limiting gatherings to 10 people or less, because in fact we cannot control how many people show up for in-person meetings. And I think that the language in this amended ordinance before us tonight gives bodies such as the Planning Commission the ability to get back to work. And that can be done just as we're doing tonight on a Zoom or other electronic platform. And that is by no means an effort on my part to stand in the way of other public bodies in this county doing work. It is simply an expression of my concern for the health and well-being of the residents of this county. Thank you.
Yeah, I just happen to disagree with the way we're going about it. I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, I would gladly make a motion and we can discuss based on that motion. And the motion I would make is to adopt this this modified ordinance with the additional language that all public meetings will continue on an electronic basis until no earlier than the start date of the governor's phase 2 of his plan to bring Virginia back to work.
Well, I appreciate your motion, Mr. Woodson. Is there a second?
Madam Chair, this is Debbie Donahue. For discussion purposes, I will second.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue. Did you have something in particular that you wanted to discuss?
I think I've said everything I needed to specific to the tourist homes. With regards of health and safety, I have to agree with the governor's position and follow his lead I think the citizens I speak to are more concerned about health at this point than being able to meet in a room.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue. So it sounds like you would support the resolution to modify and add the wording that Mr. Whitson has suggested.
If that will allow us to do business and do it safely through electronic means like we're doing now, yes, I would agree with that.
Well, I think what Mr. Frazier pointed out is until the Planning Commission can form a physical quorum to get their electronic meeting rules in place, they're going to have a problem doing any business.
Yeah, the only thing we can do is what would be considered essential business, and what exactly is that?
Yes, and so you would be able to do essential business or that business that is statutorily required.
That's just a comp plan. At least we could get that much done.
And this is for a certain period of time, obviously.
Well, I would just say that, I've looked around at what all the other counties around us are doing, and they're all doing their work. They're all working on their plans. They're all taking on the public's business. They're all entertaining applications.
Rezonings.
All of that. And it is incredibly frustrating to me that with the amount of work that we have to do, both as a county and on behalf of our constituents, that we can't get some of this work done. I understand that there are public safety concerns. I understand that very well, and I think this board has been incredibly responsive from the very onset of this crisis to every aspect of the public safety concerns. I would also say that as a chair coming into any meeting, you don't know what to anticipate necessarily in terms of a crowd. Sometimes you'll have a much bigger crowd than you could ever anticipate. But usually you have a very small crowd and very few people. And there are ways, we didn't resort to it for the Second Amendment issue when it came to Rappahannock, but some localities did ask folks to stand outside the courthouse and take up their public business that way, and negotiated the avenues of safety that way. So I do think there are ways to take it up and to take it up safely, and to keep punting it down the road when there are things that need to be done that are essential business, and when there are things that could be done for the public benefit, create jobs and opportunities in the county during this economic downturn. I really think we need to have some faith in our chair people and let them do their jobs. And with that, has everyone had a say? Mr. Parrish, I don't think you spoke about the modification.
I was just wanted to ask Mr. Curry if that extra language throws any wrench in the works at all.
I don't think it is problematic if it's the will of the majority of the board. I would just want to know precisely how it would be inserted. And I believe it would be inserted as section 2F, just one last paragraph in the public meetings and public hearings section of the ordinance. But I would want clarification on the precise wording and the precise location for that wording.
So aren't we going to need that before we can vote?
Yes.
Mr. Curry, if you could bring up the ordinance, please, then I'll work quick.
Right. So the section 2, public meetings and public hearings, you can see how it rolls through, and then the trailing paragraphs. E being that even with all this said, nothing in this ordinance shall prohibit public bodies from holding in-person public meetings, provided the various executive orders and subsequent executives are considered, and public health safety measures are also taken into consideration. I guess this is the section that you would modify.
Yeah, I'll make a quick proposal, and I apologize, this is on the fly, so you'll have to help me with the correct nomenclature and description, but I would modify subsection E to read public bodies shall not hold in-person public meetings any earlier than the start date of phase 2 of the governor's I'm forgetting the official title of it, of the governor's plan. So I'm mindful. It's important that this be very short term. It is a public health concern, and I think it's critical we listen to public health officials, not politicians and elected officials, and that would include me. You know, I'm not the one to judge when it's safe to gather again.
So I think the wording that you want is included in the paragraph regarding rentals. The governor of Virginia has declared start date of phase, I believe, 2.
2, exactly. Blueprint. That's it. Yep. So I think that's an easy modification to make, and that's subsection E of that section. That's not my dog barking, by the way.
Sorry.
Mr. Fraser, is that your dog, maybe?
No, not my dog.
It's my turn. Sorry, guys. I was due.
I don't know who was
Mr.
barking
Curry,
at me,
if you'll mute my mic for a moment, please.
Yes. So, Mr. Whitson, then maybe if you could just read slowly the wording that you would like inserted, and I will scroll down to the other section so you can see that part when you get to it.
Yeah, I think it right. You can strike the phrase "nothing in this ordinance shall prohibit" and begin subsection E with the phrase "public bodies shall not hold in-person public meetings any earlier than the start date of phase 2, in quotations, of the governor's," and then you'll have to lift in the language from above. Then phase 2 of the governor's Forward Virginia Blueprint. I think that's about as simple a modification as we can make to reflect my proposed change.
Mr. Looks like Christine's hand is raised. That's Chair Smith, this is Debbie Donahue. Mr. Curry, that would allow the comprehensive plan work to occur?
Well, the language above would, I think.
The determination that would be have to be made relative to the comprehensive plan as well, whether it's statutorily required, and I think arguably it is statutorily required. So I think that definitely could happen electronically.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry about that. Could we just review where the new wording is going in, please?
Yes.
The new wording relates solely to how meetings are held or not. So the separate question about something being statutorily required is a separate section altogether. So the only modification I'm proposing is the one we were just contemplating, which is okay. So this language currently on the screen relates to the expansion of essential business to now include statutorily required business. I'm not
right. This entire section 2 is regarding public meetings and public hearings.
Yes, subsection B, I'm fine with that.
And then section E of section 2 would be the portion that is modified.
Correct.
And I understand the proposal is that it would be modified, section E would be modified to read, public bodies shall not hold in-person public meetings any earlier than the start date of phase 2 of the governor's Forward Virginia Blueprint.
That's exactly right, Mr. Curry. Thank you.
I mean, I think we have to specify that when it applies to our locality, not just when everybody moves into phase 2.
Public bodies is previously defined in this ordinance. Let's see here, to be these groups listed, the work of all local boards, including the Board of Supervisors, School Board, Planning Commission, any other local or regional board, commission, committee, or authority created by the Board of Supervisors or to which the Board of Supervisors appoints, recommends, appoints all or a portion of its members collectively, public bodies and individually public body. So you could narrow that down further if you wanted to from that definition. Subordinate public bodies or something like that.
Yeah, I was thinking more to say when phase 2 is rolled out for our locality, or when phase 2 comes into effect for our locality, just to be specific.
Okay, that's reasonable. That's Mr. Whitson, I guess, his motion.
Yep. What's the what are you adding or what are you changing?
I think.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Curry.
Ms. Smith is essentially referring to the fact that right now Northern Virginia is being held back in phase 2, and so there could be a time in the future when some area of Virginia moves to phase 2, but not Rappahannock County.
Right. That's a great point. It's a great point.
Or hopefully we move into phase 2 before Northern Virginia does.
Or everybody else.
Yep. No, that's a great point.
So the start date of phase 2 for Rappahannock County of the governor's
please.
Yeah.
Exactly. So is that an amended motion then, Mr. Whitson?
Hold on.
Sorry. This is Keir Whitson.
I'm sorry. Is that an amended motion there, Mr. Whitson, to include that language?
Yeah, that's fine with me. So I'll agree to that change to specifically reference Rappahannock County. given the real possibility that Virginia might not go into phase 2 all at once. So that's fine.
And do you still second with that change, Ms. Donahue?
Absolutely, that was an excellent change.
And just to add to this discussion, I mean, I do agree with Mr. Frazier that if we can go out and dine, I don't really understand why we can't take on public business. And I do understand the crowd control issues, but it's sort of overly flattering to think the building committee is going to draw more than 10 people. Or the rules committee, or any of those organizations that need to do work.
Well, but those are your least common denominator, Madam Chair. And while nobody shows up for a building committee meeting, we know from recent experience that dozens of people will show up for planning commission meetings, as one example. So we are taking admittedly a broad brush here, and I think again that it is not the right time to be calling public in-person meetings, and I'm continuing to beat that dead horse. So I guess we'll agree to disagree, and I'm okay with that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Parrish?
Aye.
Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Whitson?
Aye.
Frazier?
Nay.
And I also. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your patience.
COVID-19 update and discussion. Are there any other matters in terms of public safety or related matters that we should discuss? Mr. Curry?
Yes, I wanted to briefly introduce publicly the CARES Act funding that will be headed towards the Rappahannock County that the board is aware of. The funding from the federal government through the state, I think $1.3 billion was sent to the state, of which a portion could be retained by the state and a portion passed on to localities. The governor chose to pass along about half of that, $650 million, to localities, either proportionate share of population. So those dollars are very restricted in what they can be used for, and must be spent, or at least obligated, by December 30, 2020. So there are going to need to be some decisions made by the board on how to allocate those funds. I must certify that we will accept and use the funds appropriately by next week, and I will do that. But the hard work will then follow of how exactly we will use them. And we can use them for our increased costs due to COVID-19, whether they be PPE or modifications to buildings needed to accommodate COVID-19, or increased hours of emergency personnel, or for EMS or otherwise. But those actual costs for the county, unless pandemic gets much worse, will not be enough to allocate all the dollars that are coming our way. And so we'll have to have some open discussions with the schools, who also recently received a sizable funding from CARES Act. And we'll have to have some decisions with the community. The board will on how you could potentially develop a program to invest in with your business partners to help them through this time. So I just wanted to introduce that. I know the board has received the information, and I'll let the board discuss this to the extent that you want tonight, and then we'll be focusing on it in more detail at your next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. Did anybody have any questions related to that CARES Act disbursement?
Mr. Parrish here. I was wondering about the food pantry. Would that be able to use that kind of reimbursement.
So the rules are very strict, and to the extent that I think it could be tracked back to COVID-19 related, the answer is almost always yes. We'd have to have a very clear pathway to why the expenditure is related to COVID-19. So if it was, the food pantry has been tracking increased activity, to the extent that their needs are related to that increased activity, I believe it could be used, but not for their regular costs.
Right.
One thing that it cannot be used for is for revenue replacement for the county. We have been talking a lot about our revenue forecast coming up and not sure what meals and lodging taxes or sales taxes will be. This funding specifically cannot be held to replace revenue shortfalls.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. Ms. Donahue, did you have any questions?
I don't believe so, not at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Whitson.
Madam Chair, thank you. I've clearly said enough tonight, and I appreciate everyone's patience in that regard. Thank you. And it will be interesting for all of us individually and collectively to start thinking about how and where to apply these funds. And clearly the rules are going to constrain us to some extent, but I think as the local governing body, we'll have a great responsibility to make sure that this money is used as effectively as possible. So I look forward to that analysis and working with all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitson. Mr. Frazier?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just wondering if we've gotten any data from either the school or the sheriff department on what they may have encountered with unforeseen or increased costs as related to COVID-19.
I've had just very preliminary conversations with Dr. Grimsley. She's in the meeting now, and you could bring her in if you'd like. As far as the sheriff's office, their costs are down. Overtime's down, extra hours are down. So I don't know that there's much of a resource there, possibly some PPE costs, but overall their overall expenses are lower because there's no bailiffs, there's a reduction in work.
Right, I see. Well, I guess I was thinking about PPE, but I guess if they can absorb it because they don't have the cost of the bailiffs or whatever.
I think we could use it for the cost of the PPE, even if they can absorb it. But at the end of the day, it's a sizable amount of money, and it's a drop in the bucket. Dr. Grimsley does have her hand up, so if a board member wants to recognize her, I can bring her into the conversation.
Please do go ahead and patch her in, Gary.
Dr. Grimsley, you should have an open mic.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for recognizing me to speak on this issue, and I thank you so much. I am wondering about the difference between CARES Act and FEMA funding that could be brought into the county for some of these issues. I know for the schools, we have very broad flexibility on our COVID response. Basically, our COVID response became business as usual with organizational expenses and things. So we are able to either use what we can in fiscal year 20 or carry over that funding. We have about 18 months to reimburse through the state on unforeseen costs. So that is the strategy right now being considered by the schools to use the majority of our CARES Act funding for unforeseen costs, especially not knowing the forecasts and revenue and the contingency funds and things like that. So we do plan to hopefully use the majority of those funds to deal with whatever we have to in reopening schools and a lot of those challenges. But there's also FEMA related costs, and I'm wondering, Mr. Curry, if you can comment on that. About whether or not we can collaborate on that county application through FEMA, or the schools are able to independently apply for that. So that's another avenue of funding that could also help with this this crisis and how we're responding.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr.
We are reviewing our opportunities to apply for Stafford Act funds through FEMA. We haven't talked about any dollar amounts, but the CARES Act funding is in excess of $500,000. So it's a reasonable investment in our community that needs to be shifted in the right direction. FEMA dollars would likely be much less and have to be very carefully identified and linked to expenditures. But we're exploring all avenues.
Excellent. And I would be very willing to collaborate and help with any of those initiatives to make sure we bring in whatever revenue we can to effectively respond to this issue.
Thank you, Dr. Grimsley.
Yes.
I did notice earlier, Patty Hardy also had her hand up. I think if we're allowing the people to speak, that if Patty wants to put her hand up, that if she had something to say, and if you happen to see it, Gary, I do think we should patch her in as well.
She did have her hand up earlier. It is not up now.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Let's see, where were we? We were reviewing if there were any other questions in regards to the COVID-19 situation. I think we were with you, Mr. Frazier. Did you have anything additional?
Well, I think I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Donahue, did you have anything?
She's muted.
No, Madam Chair, I'm good.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Whitson?
Thank you again for your patience tonight, Madam Chair, and my colleagues. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Parrish?
No, nothing, thanks.
Okay. And I would just say it does seem like our numbers have plateaued according to the most recent information we've seen from Dr. Kircher at the Regional Health District. So I just want to reiterate to everyone to please continue to look to the guidance of the Virginia Health Department and the Centers for Disease Control as we navigate this COVID-19 situation in the county. There's been a lot of emphasis placed recently on the analysis by zip code. And I would just continue to remind people that just because there's not reported cases in a zip code, that does not mean that there is not any viral spread within that zip code. And so wherever you go in the county, the way that you conduct your business, you should conduct it in a safe way. And if no one else has anything else to add, I would ask for a motion to adjourn. Oh, I do know. I'm so sorry. I did have one other thing. Do we have an official opinion from the county attorney as to how we're conducting our business at this time, Mr. Curry?
An official opinion related to
in writing as to what constitutes essential business and how we've got this all set up to do our business and what we're prohibiting other bodies from doing?
Not that I'm aware of.
I really think we should have something in writing as a guiding document to show that we've taken the time to consider these things and seek a legal opinion. And as we enter into stage 2, should we discuss the risk that we're engaging with our insurance companies and see if they have any concerns over our conducting business in public spaces? Do we have that information?
I do not have the information, but it seems like a reasonable request of our insurance company.
Okay. Well then, if I do apologize to my peers on the board. I was very distracted when the dog started barking, but I do think it would behoove us as a board to seek an opinion from the county attorney and instruct him to put into writing the guidance that we've received regarding what constitutes essential business, how we are to conduct it, what business we should not be conducting, what business we are asking other bodies not to conduct, and all of the matters that have informed our guiding documents during this COVID-19 crisis. And I guess I would put that in the form of a motion, and I would ask for a second.
I'll second that, Madam Chairman. I have a little bit of discussion on that as well.
Okay, well, there's been a motion and a second now, Mr. Frazier. You may be able to discuss it a little bit better than I'm perhaps words.
But the thing is, no governing body, local governing body, or perhaps a regional commission can really do anything without a written opinion from their attorney, because I mean, that's just the way court cases are set up. So if we were ever to be brought into court on something that we were doing or didn't do without a written opinion from our local government attorney, we're kind of in bad shape. That's really a prerequisite for what we're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Is there any other discussion on this motion and second?
Well, yeah, Mr. Parrish here. I'm just wondering, this is not on the agenda. I can understand that the chairman would ask the county administrator to ask the county attorney to do this, but to vote on it, I mean, that's just a random item that was brought up. I mean, it's not on the agenda, so how could we vote on it?
Well, it's not a formal document. It's related to the COVID-19 discussion. So I don't see it as an addendum item. Mr. Curry, do you think it fits underneath the COVID-19 discussion, or would it have needed to be on the agenda in advance?
I think generally you want to give the public as much time in advance to know what you're going to talk about. I do think this is related to COVID. And then in reviewing specifically for an unrelated matter earlier, your local ordinance that guides the meeting construction and addendum items and orders of the day, that is specifically written for regular meetings. So this is not a regular meeting, so presumably those rules don't apply to not regular meetings. That may be something the board wants to take up at some point in time. But I don't believe there are any special constraints on this vote at this time relative to orders of the day or addendum items.
Thank you, Mr. Curry. And I do appreciate that point, Mr. Parrish, and I do try to take pains to be very transparent as to what's going on in the meeting. And to my mind, this does fit squarely under how we are negotiating the COVID-19 crisis. Ms. Donahue?
If it's not too much trouble, can I hear what the motion is again, please?
Do you have it written down, Mr. Curry? Could repeat it, please?
I have it, I think, at least paraphrased or close, and it was to request an opinion from the county attorney to get his opinion on what constitutes essential business or statutorily required business as it's included in the continuity government ordinance, and confirm the the operations of the Board of Supervisors through the continuity government ordinance. Is that right?
That sounds correct to me. Is that what you believe you seconded, Mr. Frazier?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Donahue, does that answer your question?
It does. I have no further discussion.
Okay, very good. Mr. Whitson?
Sorry, I was muted. The first part of your motion, I totally get. I'm still not clear on the second part of it. So it's clear to me asking for the county attorney to offer a more clearly delineated definition for essential business. I'm good with that. What's the spirit of the remainder of the motion?
Well, and that, I mean, I think that it's the only motion that's on the table. The other part of the discussion was if we should seek information from our insurance companies as to if we're exposing ourselves to any risk by conducting public meetings once things do loosen up, just to make sure that we're insured for whatever we do take on. But there's not a motion on the table at this time to that effect.
And I believe the answer to what you were getting at, Mr. Whitson, was that I think Ms. Smith also wants the county attorney to reinforce in his opinion that the method through which the Board of Supervisors and these other related bodies in Rappahannock are operating electronically via the continuity of government ordinance is supported by him as an extension of his review of that essential and statutorily required business.
That's yeah. That the second part seems unnecessary. It's implied in part one. So anyway, I would just suggest that the motion be stopped at making the request for clarification of what essential business means.
I'm sorry to belabor this point, but could you repeat it in its entirety, please, Mr. Curry?
Request an opinion from the county attorney as to what constitutes essential business and statutorily required business with respect to the continuity of government ordinance, and confirm that the continuity of government ordinance supports the current method of meeting by the board and by public bodies.
Yeah, we have an ordinance. You don't need the in my opinion, you just ask for an opinion or clarification of what essential business means, because that drives everything else vis-a-vis electronic meetings and what happens within them. So I would suggest just truncating the proposed motion to stop after the first part, asking for clarification of essential business.
So it sounds like you're requesting that the motion be amended to strike everything after and confirm. If you could read the motion up to that point, please, Mr. Curry.
Request the county attorney, request an opinion from the county attorney as to what constitutes essential business and statutorily required business as it relates to the continuity of government ordinance.
Stop right. I would suggest you just stop right there. I'll support it if we could just stop it right there.
Okay.
Well, if it's worded properly, I can agree with you, Mr. Whitson, but I'm not sure that if we're not very definitive what we are asking for, we may not get the answer that we're looking for.
I think the way Ms. Smith has laid it out and Mr. Curry has recorded it is pretty clear. I don't know how you make that language more clear. I mean,
I think if it builds consensus, I'm willing to amend my original motion, Mr. Frazier, if you're willing to still second it.
I am. I just want to make sure that we actually get this in a timely manner too.
Well, and we may want to change the verb that drives the whole thing to instruct instead of request. But I think given how important this request is, I would hope that the county attorney would take it on, as soon as possible.
You could ask the county attorney expedite the production of an opinion on the definition of essential business and statutorily required business within the meaning of the continuity of government ordinance. You could use the word expedite. You could on a priority basis, whatever you want. I mean, I think we made it clear we want it soon.
So I would say expedite or request you expedite an opinion. Mr. Curry, do you have that? Could you read it back, please?
I guess you're request an expedited opinion from the county?
Correct. Yeah, if that's the proper placement of the verb. Request, I think it's probably more correct to say we request on an expedited, that the county attorney on an expedited basis provide the Board of Supervisors with an opinion as to the, I don't want to talk over Ms. Smith's proposal, which is fine. But we requested the county attorney provide, comma, on an expedited basis, comma, and then adopt the rest of her language. This meeting makes me feel, it makes me feel like my workday never ended.
That amended language worked for me. I'm willing to amend my motion to reflect that language. Mr. Frazier, are you willing to second still with that amended language?
Yes.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second, and I appreciate everyone bearing with us while we work through the finer points of that language. Mr. Frazier,
Aye.
Mr. Whitson,
All right.
Ms. Donahue,
Aye.
Mr. Parrish,
I can't say that I fully understand what this, the purpose of this is, and what's going to, how it's going to help. So I'm not going to vote.
Okay, so we'll record that as an abstention.
That'll work.
Very good, thank you. And I also. Thank you, everyone. And I think in terms of just the insurance details, we can probably work through that, offline. And thank you, everyone, for bearing with me while we got that bit of business added. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting if there's nothing further?
So moved. Ron Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. Do I have a second, please?
Second, Debbie Donahue.
Thank you, Debbie. I have a motion and a second. Mr. Frazier,
Aye.
Ms. Donahue,
Aye.
Mr. Whitson,
All right.
Mr. Parrish,
Aye.
and I also. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Aye.